упаковано, кстати, отлично. Как айфон.
Застопорились, потому что дней 5 назад очередное о том, что эти переговоры совсем не нужны, что они смирились со своей судьбой.
Moscow is now planning to deploy its nuclear-capable ballistic Sarmat missiles. The first military unit armed with the missile is likely to be deployed around autumn.
Food prices in the U.S. soared to record heights in February 2022. Global food prices also followed suit, posting a 20.7% increase compared to last year.
...2021 was Europe's warmest on record. While Sicily recorded the continent's hottest day, a blistering 48.8 degrees Celsius.
New Taipei City hit by People's Liberation Army ground force missiles, reads this headline. Others said the president had declared a state of emergency in response to war and that ships had exploded in waters outside the country's capital city. In the last month, Taiwan has upped its civilian warfare readiness, also partially in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, raising the nation's alert level and publishing a wartime survival handbook.
Заявление о возможности ядерного удара по России без консультаций с НАТО. Слушайте, мы тоже можем нанести ядерный удар по Великобритании без консультаций с НАТО. Великобритания великолепная с этой точки зрения цель. Островное государство. Значит, ущерб континенту будет минимизирован.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. This is going to be one of my most densely packed videos that I've released in a long time. I would encourage you to put something on in the background. It's important that we consume information because in the fog of war it's an absolute essential commodity, but at the same time that we pair that with actionable behaviors towards the end of bolstering our preparedness skill sets and supplies and planning. So let's just jump right into it. I cannot triage all this information. You're going to have to stick with me to the end because there's probably some of the most important stuff is going to come towards the end of the video, okay? I organize this in terms of what's most interesting to me, but there's so much stuff going on right now, guys. It is insane. Now, Russia blames hackers for imminent warning of NATO nuclear attack. If you're like me and you get around the internet, you know that there was a rumor circulating that Russia was alerting its citizens to prepare for a retaliatory nuclear attack, and they were sending out all this information about how to survive a nuclear war. Now, according to the Russians, this is according to the Russians, Russian officials blamed hackers for a Tuesday message posted on a press website for the country's emergency services agency that warned about a possible threat of a retaliatory nuclear strike. Okay, this provided all sorts of information on how to survive the nuclear fallout and all the rest, okay? Now, the Russians are saying that they were hacked. And we also have a recent story that's very similar to this coming out of Taiwan, where the Taiwanese released an emergency video, some people think prematurely, that it tells its citizens, warns its citizens that the Chinese are attacking and that they need to prepare for nuclear war. Now, were these just accidental premature leaks, or was this actually a hack job? Because countries don't tend to take too quickly to admitting that they were hacked, okay? So it could very well be that this was just an accidental leak and that this was a legitimate message that was, created by the Russian government that just prematurely leaked by accident or for whatever reason. Maybe there was some glitch in the emergency broadcast system there. Whatever the case is, we're starting to see this. Could this have been a test run of their system? It's hard to say, but that's very interesting. They warned that there was going to be some kind of attack on Easter, the Orthodox Easter, which is today, which of course hasn't transpired yet. But very, very interesting stuff. We're edging ever so closely to a nuclear engagement. Now, U.S. plans, now this is according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, okay? So take this one with a colossal grain of salt. But this is the news of the day that we need to be focused on if we want to understand the complete scope of the propaganda war. Russian Defense Ministry says Washington wants to use weapons of mass destruction to frame Moscow. Russia has accused the U.S. of planning to use WMDs in Ukraine in order to frame Moscow. The U.S. is preparing a provocation aimed at accusing the Russian armed forces of using chemical, biological, or tactical nuclear weapons. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, the head of the Russian Radiation Chemical Biological Protection Force, said on Saturday. So they are claiming that for whatever reason, that the U.S. is going to create a false flag event, which is going to create the grounds and justification for them to enter into a war. Okay, so they propose 3 different scenarios in which this could possibly occur. The most probable scenario is a false flag attack on civilians and active sabotage on Ukrainian sites which were involved in the development of the components of weapons of mass destruction. Okay, so that could be something like a nuclear power station. The second option, which would be discreetly using WMDs in small quantities. He claimed that the Pentagon initially planned to deploy WMDs in Azovstal, a large steel mill in Azov Sea port of Mariupol. Now, it's important, guys, that I emphasize this, that this is what the Russians are saying. This is not what I'm saying. This is not something I believe by a long shot. I'm just giving you the information so you can understand, because it appears that both sides are projecting onto the other, and this creates a lot of confusion because, you know, both sides are saying that the other side is going to do this, and so you can never really understand what is actually happening when it does happen, because both sides can say, see, I told you so, right? And it's a great way to cover your own tracks as well. The last option is what he called an open use of WMDs on the battlefield. This was the most least probable scenario in their wargaming, and he said that it could be used on Donbass towns. And I guess the idea here, we need to understand, you know, if they are going to do this, why would they do this, right? The idea would be that it would be grounds to enter a war or to make Russia look bad in the global scheme of things. However, and this is the end goal, this would be the only real motive, would be to pull the U.S. into a direct engagement with the U.S. Now, I don't necessarily think that you would need that sort of event to occur at this point in the game to justify U.S. involvement. So it seems like either this is all just a saber rattling, and that none of this is meant to be taken seriously, that this is just the U.S. stalling, if you will. It doesn't seem as though that this would necessarily be required at this point. Maybe it would. Maybe something like this needs to happen to boost public support for a conflict, but it's very, very hard to say. Now, there is some speculation that even if Russia used a tactical nuke, that countries around the world would still support them who do currently support them. The Chinese Communist Party would continue to support Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia in the event that it used a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, according to Assistant Secretary of Defense Graham Allison. The answer is yes, Allison said when asked if China would continue its support of Russia regardless of escalations by Putin. And, you know, I don't see why he would be wrong. This is from Zero Hedge. I don't often quote Zero Hedge because it's kind of, you know, sketchy. News source, but it's usually stuff which on its face anyways seems well put together, but you know, take it all with a grain of salt. But that is a direct quote from that guy who happens to be a foreign policy pundit, so take it for what it's worth, I guess. Now, so this is getting a lot of attention right now, this whole threats of, you know, tactical nuclear weapon deployment. The question is, why would Russia ever want to do this in the first place? What would the motive be? I guess the motive could be, on the one hand, it could be to instill fear in the other side if they felt that they were actually losing. Now, the word on the underground is that they're not really losing. Okay, the word on the underground is, in fact, that they're winning in the places that they need to win in. Now, you could equally make the argument that maybe the US or NATO wants to deploy a tactical nuke because they are in fact losing. And not a lot of people have considered this because right now I think a lot of people are still under the impression that we are omnipotent, we are invincible, and the whole American exceptionalism reigns supreme, in that people are just presuming that, oh, the Russians can't even take Ukraine, because most people don't even realize that Ukraine has one of the most powerful trained militaries in the Western Front. You know, forget about, you know, the French nukes and the submarines and the British SAS. You know, the Ukrainians have actually been fighting a war for many, many years. And this is the front line of NATO. This is where NATO has committed a lot of resources, to the point where the U.S. Stockpile of these small arms like javelins, stingers, I don't know if that's what you consider them, but they're starting to become depleted. And that's according to Bloomberg, that a significant amount of these weapons is now depleted, and that the U.S. needs to now replenish this inventory. So, you know, it could work both ways. There might be some potential use. The other potential use is, of course, if Russia feels that they are losing, they're backed into a corner, they have no other choice. The way to stop the progression of the Allied forces, if you will, would be to use a nuke and hopefully force some kind of stalemate, right? So it's really hard to say, but that's the reports coming out of a lot of different places. Now, we have Russia, NATO, cybersecurity, which is supposedly escalating. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, even Victoria Nuland is chiming in on this, and she's saying that, and I quote, "Yes, we are dealing with Putin, and he has already given the order to commit horrific, brutal war crimes, so anything is possible, and we need to be prepared for Russia's use of different types of weapons with catastrophic consequences. And although we are talking about war crimes for which Putin will have to answer, the use of such weapons will take the situation to a fundamentally new level, and we will ensure that these consequences occur." So she's basically committing that were the Russians to use these weapons, that the United States will intervene in some way, shape, or form. And this is the reason why this is so critical, guys. Because they are basically committing. They are saying, and she says, and I quote, "In this case, the price of Putin's actions will simply be astronomical." So, she is basically committing to a fight, more or less, although the language that she uses is a little muddy, but for the most part, if there is some WMD used, whether it's nuclear, chemical, or biological, we can bet that the U.S. is going to get involved, and then we are a stone's throw away from DEFCON 1, which is all-out nuclear war. President Zelensky says that Ukraine should receive security guarantees, this is Victoria Nuland speaking, that will replace NATO Article 5 for us. Do you think it's possible for the United States to provide such guarantees at the bilateral level? That was the interviewer asking Nuland. Nuland responds, "Negotiations are underway between governments that are not public, and I can only say that the United States is negotiating with Kiev on security assurances that Ukraine can receive." That is, assurances, not guaranteed. Note that security assurances is a term of the Budapest Memorandum, which stipulates the absence of fixed guarantees of protection or collective defense. As I said exactly as I said, and that's all I can publicly say for now. So these assurances, as opposed to guarantees. Okay, so what does that really mean? That's what it really boils down to. I personally think that NATO is terrified of fighting the Russians. I think that the Russians are the one non-quantifiable benefit that they're getting from this war is the experience in fighting in these urban combat zones. And, that cannot be understated at this point in the game. Now, there's also, and I'm not saying that, the Russians aren't, obviously meeting a lot of resistance, but we need to understand, if you truly want to understand what's going on in the battlefield, you need to view it objectively, not from the perspective of my side or your side or trying to boost people's morale. If you really want to understand what's going on, you need to strip all that away and just try to see it for what it is. And it appears as though The Russians are not stalling at all, in spite of reports weeks ago that said they were running out of ammunition, which was just a ludicrous proposition on its face, considering that the Russians are the second largest arms dealer in the world. Anyways, Britain threatens to use non-NATO nuclear weapons. Okay, Russia identifies SAS forces in Ukraine. So we talked about this last week, that there was speculation that the SAS were in Ukraine training the Russians, and this is from a more questionable source, so take it with a grain of salt. British SAS forces have entered Ukraine, Russian media reported, noting that they are experts in sabotage operations and guerrilla warfare. Russian-Britain tensions have escalated in the last 48 hours, with Johnson threatening Russia with non-NATO nuclear weapons. The appearance of the British SAS Special Forces in Lviv can be considered as a direct entry of London into an armed conflict with Russia, Russian forces emphasize. We're getting closer, guys. The specific British forces were sent in two groups of 12 people each. They are experts in sabotage, guerrilla warfare, coup organization, mass demonstrations, assassinations of state leaders, recruitments of agents, and preparation for terrorist attacks. They are currently at the disposal of the 16th Army Air Brigade, Brody, in the Lviv region. In particular, Boris Johnson announced that the United Kingdom is considering launching a nuclear strike without coordinating the move with the other partners in the North American alliance. Okay? So what we're seeing here is an intensification, a ratcheting up, because recently was the comparison was made with this whole Russian Sarmat missile, that it could hit Britain and basically annihilate the UK. Now, the thing is, the Russians have had plenty of nuclear missiles capable of hitting Britain from anywhere in Russia for the longest time, so I don't really know why that's relevant. The whole thing with the new Satan missile is that it can basically circumnavigate the world in the opposite direction. So it has such a long range that it doesn't have to fire over the northern hemisphere. It can actually fire below the southern hemisphere and thereby evade a lot of missile defense systems. It has multiple re-entry glide vehicles that can attack targets in multiple different locations. So it has many warheads. It has many diversive warheads as well, duds, decoys, if you will. And it just has the capacity to carry something up to like 50 megatons or some crazy amount of ordnance, which of course would devastate a very, very large region. Now, this is very important because, you know, Britain is getting ever so closer to having this engagement with Russia, and I don't know if that's politically motivated, if Boris Johnson is trying to save his own ass, but who knows. Russian space chief warns of possible trigger for World War III. An attack against a spacecraft could usher in the next global war, Dmitry Rogozin, the head of Russia's National Space Agency, said on Saturday. One must keep in mind that the destruction of a foreign spacecraft means World War III. It is casus belli, and there's no doubt about that, Rogan said, using a Latin term for the formal legal reason to start a war. Now, ASAT or anti-satellite weapons are something that Russia has, China has, the United States has. Of course, Russia has that S-550 missile defense system that they've tested. Remember, 3 months ago when they shot down that satellite, I released a video saying that I have a bad feeling that that is a harbinger for a major war to come, and sure enough, it was. And it seems as though this is being talked about again for some reason, also referencing the Boeing X-37, which is an unmanned U.S. shuttle-like spacecraft that is currently orbiting Earth. You perhaps recall hearing about this. It was launched many, many years ago, and we still don't know much about it. It's shrouded in mystery as to what it's capable of. Does it have nuclear weapons on it? Is it capable of some sort of electromagnetic pulse? Is it for the purpose of targeting satellites in space? Nobody really knows. But according to Dmitry Rogozin, he thinks that it may carry weapons of mass destruction. So we may well see this thing go into space in the not so distant future. And so this thing is just, you know, this thing is intensifying on all fronts. And one of the Russian space facilities was recently lit on fire, as well as many other Russian military installations within Russia right now. they're suspecting that it could be cyber attack or sabotage. I know a lot of people are talking about the food processing plants that have been on fire, apparently in numbers which are higher than average. But I think the actual fires that are taking place in these Russian government buildings, that is a more significant story, which may be being overshadowed by that. And it's significant because, you know, that means that the fight is being taken to the Russians in their territory, which increases the likelihood that something very bad could happen along the lines of a nuclear escalation. Now, Russian airlines have been told to prepare to fly without GPS. Okay, because remember, GPS is an American thing. Russia's national air traffic regulator has told carriers to prepare to fly their planes without relying on American global positioning systems, GPS, satellite-based navigation tool, reported on Friday. Now, they can fly without GPS. It's obviously going to be a bit more analog and a bit more challenging, but they do have the capability to do that. Carriers should evaluate the risks of GPS malfunction and provide additional training to its pilots on how to act in such situations. However, they did clarify that disconnection from GPS or its disruption won't affect flight safety in Russia. The GPS signal isn't the only source of information about the location of a plane at any given moment. Crews can also rely on the aircraft's inertial navigation system, as well as ground-based navigation and landing systems. In addition, the Russians also have their own GLONASS system, which is basically the Russian equivalent of GPS. It's a network of 24 plus satellites which provide that sort of telemetric data, if you will. The Russians are claiming that it's destroyed many weapons which were delivered by the US and EU to Ukraine. We showed some videos in the supercut that were reference to this. Apparently, the Russians also seized very, very large stockpiles of weapons and ammunition, missiles, and stuff like that. So, you know, the Russians are targeting this stuff. So I think all this talk about sending weapons to Ukraine, it appears, at least right now, to be in vain. I'm sure some of it is making it through to the front lines, but there's a long way for this stuff to travel in order to make it to those front lines. And of course, with the air superiority the Russians have, they can easily target this stuff from a variety of different places with high precision, long-range missiles. So, you know, it seems like kind of a waste, to be brutally honest, but, you know, who's to say? Who's to say what's really going on there? Okay, so now on the front of the food supply and just the resource scarcity, FBI warns cyber attacks could impact world food supply. The Bureau said a rise in ransomware attacks targeting farming co-ops could disrupt the entire food chain. The top U.S. law enforcement agency has warned of increased cyber attacks on agricultural cooperatives, saying hackers could target large-scale farms and potentially impact the world's food supply as if it wasn't already impacted enough already. Part of my gripe with a lot of the talk about, you know, fires in these food processing plants is that, you know, that's not the main thing which is driving the high cost of food. Okay, the high cost of food is being driven by inflation, people's skepticism of the dollar as the global reserve currency, of course, the war, the price of fertilizer, the price of pesticide, insecticide, the fact that, you know, the harvests just weren't as good last year and may not be as good this year as well, considering that only a small percentage of the Ukrainian seeds are in the ground. Those same seeds feed the developing world. And without that, of course, you're going to see instability around the world, which will take the form of refugees migrating out of those countries, which will create instability in receiving countries, which will, of course, create more tensions and stuff like you're seeing in Sweden with the burning of the Quran and terrorist events. And it's just a big domino effect that all these things have, okay? But the SBI's cyber division issued a notice to private industry earlier this week, pointing to a growing number of ransomware attacks on farming co-ops throughout the fall 2021 harvest. Ransomware actors may be more likely to attack agricultural cooperatives during critical planting and harvest season, disrupting operations, causing financial loss, and negatively impacting the food supply chain. It said, adding that such breaches could affect the planting season by disrupting the supply of seeds and fertilizer, as if it wasn't disrupted already. And of course, it doesn't take much to start spinning the centrifuges and create a fire if you have backdoor access to one of these facilities, because there's lots of things that can go wrong in these industrial facilities. And when I say spinning the centrifuges, that's a reference to the Stuxnet virus, which took out the Iranian nuclear program. Of course, the Stuxnet virus had unintended consequences of spreading outside of the Iranian facility and causing a lot of blowback damage, if you will. Now, this is another story for anybody who cares. Actually, yeah, let's leave that one for later, because I know there's a lot of people who are skeptical of that. Now, this one is scary. Okay, Britain's told to get ready for a truly horrific winter. Household energy providers warn of price spikes after autumn cap rise. So they're going to relieve the price caps, which have made life livable, I suppose. As many as 4 in 10 people in Britain could fall into fuel poverty when the price cap raises again in October. 4 out of 10 people are not going to be able to have a sustainable existence. And this is before the potential price increases that are going to result from being cut off from Russian natural gas. Okay, so it's not looking good. I would encourage people to prepare for a long winter. I know we just came out of winter, but next winter could be potentially a lot worse, especially for Europe. I would say that, Europeans have 6 months to prepare for some really austere times and to get all your ducks in a row as the best of your capability. Now, there's also talk of, now this is surprising, okay, U.S. warns against Russian energy ban. Now, I don't know if this is just lip service or what, but U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Thursday that a complete European ban on Russian oil and gas imports would clearly raise global oil prices and may inflict harm in Europe and other parts of the world, which is obvious. Now, this seems to run counter to everything else that the U.S. is covertly doing in order to encourage countries like Germany to abandon Russian natural gas in spite of the potential negative outcomes. Okay, so it's very difficult to say. It's kind of like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Berlin said on Wednesday that it will stop importing oil from Russia by the end of this year. However, a stoppage of gas imports is tougher for Germany, which relies heavily on Russian supplies. Moscow provides around 40% of the EU's natural gas and around a third of the bloc's oil. So if that was pulled, that means that that doesn't mean that the price is only going to go up by 40%. That means that the price is going to, probably quadruple, because that's going to create a shortage, just a physical shortage that the market, no matter how much money you have, is not going to be able to find a workaround. What else do we got here? Now, apparently, and this is for all the skeptics out there, Europe lived in 2021. It's the hottest summer ever recorded in Europe. The European summer in 2021 was 1 degree Celsius above the historical average. Both Italy and Spain broke temperature records. In Italy, what could be the highest daily maximum temperature ever recorded in Europe, 48.8 degrees was reported. It's important to understand that, people hear this talk about, 1 degree above average, 2 degrees. It only takes 3 to 4 degrees in a difference from the global average to create an ice age. So while this doesn't seem like a lot, on the whole, when distributed across the map, it can create some major climactic upheavals. Like, imagine, like, DNA, for instance, okay? It doesn't take, what are we, like, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps, and it's kind of like that, whereas it only takes a very small percentage in order to change the outcome. Okay, or maybe even a better example is, imagine if you have a compass and that compass is moved like 2 degrees, to the northeast or whatever, and you're trying to get some bearing in this direction, and you're like 2 degrees off. Well, if you go out far enough, you know, that's going to take you hundreds of miles away from your destination. So I know a lot of people don't put a whole lot of stock in that, but it's just one more factor that we're going to have to contend with as we move forward here, and one more reason to prepare to go off grid while we still have the chance. I'm in the final phases, if you will, of locking in a property, which was going to allow me to do that very thing. And we're also in the process of moving a warehouse right now, which has been incredibly cumbersome. The only good thing about doing that right now is that inventory supplies are incredibly low, but we still do have a thing or two, and we're hoping that this Shanghai and China situation relieves, because a lot of the stuff is made in China, and it's not even so much that the stuff itself is made in China, but a lot of the parts come from China, a lot of the packaging comes from China, the components. So even stuff which is made in the US or assembled in the US can't be completed. So we're short on a lot of stuff. We are going to be doing a food video. There is a company that is not very well known in the prepping community that sells survival food, which is right up our alley, and it's some of the best stuff that I've ever tasted. We're going to be talking about that in the near future. It's probably one of the best kept secrets at this point. There's a lot of garbage on the market. I always discourage people from buying the big 30-40 day buckets, because if they ever actually cracked it open and tried to eat it, they would realize that they have been had. And I've made countless videos about that, but stay tuned for that. We have a video coming on bulletproof vests and what type of vest you should choose, what types of options that there are, what the laws are in Canada surrounding that. We're going to have a special guest on the show in the coming weeks showing us how to can various foods. I know I said that a couple weeks ago. Fortunately, we've been backlogged with some other things. We have another installment with Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy. We're also going to have Dean from Arcopia Family Freeze Dry give us an update on his passive solar greenhouse in the coming weeks ahead. We just got a lot of stuff planned, guys, so stick with us. And thank you all for clicking the like button, sharing the videos, subscribing, all that good stuff. Our whole aim with this channel, and for myself at this point, is to try to get as many people prepared for the age of consequences as possible. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any insights on the stories that I've shared with you today, and what do you think is going to transpire in the weeks ahead. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.